Hello, welcome to Heady Remarks. It's July 9th, 2022, and I'm going to talk about reincarnation and other stuff. So, I've read a few books, listened to them. I listened to Reincarnation and Karma by Edgar Cayce, Physics of the Soul by Amit Goswami, and Life Before Life by Jim Tucker, and I guess also by Ian Stevenson. So I don't know if I believe in it, but it's definitely an interesting concept. And yeah. So where have you been? Yeah, I was just sort of not feeling well, just feeling kind of shitty and didn't want to stream. Oh, forgot I changed my name. What did it used to be? Who are you? Just kidding. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting idea. There's like that scientific, what is it? Law of Thermodynamics. Oh, Archie. I know a lot of atheist kind of people feel like this has been misused by people, but it's still worth mentioning, you know. The first law of thermodynamics. Archie, come on. Energy can be changed from one form to another, but it cannot be created nor destroyed. Total amount of energy and matter in the universe remains constant. Merely changing from one form to another, conservation of energy, states that energy is always conserved. It cannot be created or destroyed. In essence, energy can be converted from... Okay, let's keep saying the same thing. No Fallon tonight. She doesn't want to do it with me anymore, and she actually asked me to delete all of the episodes she had been in, so you might notice there's a lot less on there now. So, had to oblige. So it's just me, I guess. So, yeah. Kind of sucks, but what can you do? So, I don't know if you've ever heard of something called the Akashic Records. It's supposed to be like the eternal memory of the divine mind, a repository of every thought, word, and deed of every living being, good, bad, and awful, in all times, past, present, future. But those familiar with the records report that there is no judgment or implied penalty in the records. They are said to simply be a record of each soul's journey through the infinite. I'm already all over the place. Yeah, it does suck. There's like hardly any. I worked hard on a lot of those too, so kind of sucks, but I don't want to, force someone to like be on the internet if they don't want to be, So. Oh, it's Doodle. Okay, cool. Well, welcome. Yeah, I think I also sent you a link to the new Telegram channel because I wasn't the creator of the other one, so I had to create a 2.0. So if you ever get back on there, maybe check it out. But where to begin? Where to begin? I don't know how to pronounce a lot of these words. Bhagavad Gita. Edgar Cayce came up with that Akashic record. Was it him? Was he the first one? So maybe I'll start with this. I just like this poem. It's by Patton, General Patton. Apparently he believed in reincarnation. He's the general who famously stated, "We defeated the wrong enemy." World War II. Hello! Welcome. The Broken 76. So, yeah, he wrote this poem, General Patton, through a glass darkly. And it goes, so as through a glass and darkly, the age-long strife I see, where I fought in many guises, many names, but always me. And I see not in my blindness what the objects were I wrought, but as God rules o'er our bickerings, it was through his will I fought. So forever in the future shall I battle as of yore, dying to be born a fighter, but to die again once more. In the dimness of the shadows where we hairy heathens warred, I can taste in thought the lifeblood we used teeth before the sword, while in later clearer vision I can sense the coppery sweat, feel the pikes grow wet and slippery when our phalanx Cyrus met. Hear the rattle of the harness where the Persian darts bounced clear, see their chariots wheel in panic from the hoplites' leveled spear. See the goal grow monthly longer, reaching for the walls of Tyre. Hear the crash of tons of granite, smell the quenchless eastern fire. Still more clearly as a Roman can I see the legion close, as our third rank moved in forward and the short sword found our foes. Once again I feel the anguish of that blistering treeless plain, when the Parthian showered death bolts and our discipline was in vain. I remember all the suffering of those arrows in my neck, yet I stabbed a grinning savage as I died upon my back. Once again I smell the heat sparks when my Flemish plate gave way, and the lance ripped through my entrails as on Cressy's field I lay. In the windless, blinding stillness of the glittering tropic sea, I see the bubbles rising, where we set the captives free. Midst the spume of half a tempest I have heard the bulwarks go, when the crashing point-blank round shot sent destruction to our foe. I have fought with guns and cutlass on the red and slippery deck, with all the hell aflame within me and a rope around my neck. And still later, as a general, have I galloped with Murat, when we laughed at death and numbers, trusting in the emperor's star, till at last our star faded and we shouted to our doom, where the sunken road of Ohain closed us in its quivering gloom. So, but now with tanks a-clatter have I waddled on the foe, belching death at 20 paces by the star shell's ghastly glow. So as through a glass and darkly, the age-long strife I see, where I fought in many guises, many names, but always me. And I see not in my blindness what the objects were I wrought, but as God rules o'er our bickerings, it was through his will I fought. So forever in the future shall I battle as of yore, dying to be born a fighter, but to die again once more. So, what was that? He believed in it, apparently. And apparently, William Wordsworth did as well. God, I've got so many links. So many links up. I'm just going to play maybe something for a minute while I figure out what the hell I'm doing. I hope it'll let me. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I like him. I like Patton. Okay, so share screen. I'll just... I hope this works. I hope I figured out the problem. I was having issues with this, but let me know if you can hear it.
This little boy is referred to as Sam in case studies. A year and a half before he was born, his grandfather died.
When he was about 18 months old, his dad was changing his diaper one day, and Sam looked up at him and said, "When I was your age, I used to change your diaper."
That's so creepy.
Since 1996, Dr. Jim Tucker, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, has been gathering case studies of past life recognition in children that could prove that a soul returns to Earth in another.
So a lot of this past life stuff comes from children, and they tend to not, they drop it after a few years. Like, it's when they're young and they frequently just forget about it, and they don't talk about it anymore. But yeah, it's kind of strange. It like goes away. They stop remembering this stuff.
Another body.
We've now got 2,500 cases in our files from all over the world.
Many people believe in some form of reincarnation. The concept dates back to 800 BC and the Hindu Upanishads.
Upanishads.
Beginning in India, The belief that some essential part of ourselves may return after death to a new body is now being examined by some scientists as another way to prove the survival of consciousness. Can the study of past life recollections support this theory? The answer may lie within young children's memories.
Very young children, usually between the age of 2 or 3, who start reporting that they have memories from having had a past life. Some of them talk about being deceased relatives, but others will talk about being strangers in other locations. And if they give enough details, like the name of the other location, people have often gone there and found that, in fact, someone had died in the recent past whose life matches the details that the children gave.
The late psychiatrist Dr. Ian Stevenson advanced the field of reincarnation research in the 1960s, interviewing over 3,000 people who...
Yeah, Ian Stevenson's the one who did studies on children having past life memories.
...claimed to have past life memories. 2/3 of them said that in a previous life, they died from unusual causes. He focused on 25 cases in India and realized that young children talking about past lives was much more common than anyone had known. Dr. Stevenson created categories to screen for cases worthy of further study. His colleague, Jim Tucker, still uses this method.
The criteria we use to decide whether to register a case would include 2 of the following characteristics: a prediction of rebirth, an announcing dream, a birthmark or birth defect that seems related to the previous life.
Okay, yeah, so Ian Stevenson, why did I pause on that?
Statements of memories about...
So he says that not only do they have memories of other lives, but the correlating like physical facial features are similar between the people, which I thought was interesting. And then this thing with like scars or birthmarks on the same part of their body as the other person that they're supposed to be.
About the previous life, behaviors that seem related, and then also recognitions of people or places from that life.
Sam's story is an example of how a small child may express what some believe are memories of a previous life.
When Sam was 4.5, his grandmother died, and his father went out to take care of her belongings. When he came back, he brought a group of family photos, which before that, Sam's family had not had any of his father's family photos in the house. One night, Sam's mom had them spread out on the coffee table looking at them. When Sam came over and started pointing to pictures of his grandfather.
Mommy, where did these come from?
Those are pictures Daddy brought back from Grandma's funeral.
That's my car.
That's my car.
You see that picture?
Turned out that that was the grandfather's first new car, and one that he was very attached to. His parents had had no belief in reincarnation. In fact, his mother was the daughter of a Southern Baptist minister.
Oh yeah, so it's always interesting when it's people who aren't really supposed to believe in reincarnation. Oh my God, Archie, come on. Experiencing this stuff. I have to find something else. Okay, so let's see. What is it? Sorry, I have so many links open. I pulled up a page that talked about the religions that do and don't believe in it. Basically, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the Abrahamic religions are kind of not into believing in it, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if this is a manipulation of the text, but there are a couple Bible passages that seem to say that there is reincarnation just because, is it this one? 10 through 14. This is like updated in modern English. But it says, the disciples asked him, "Why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus replied, "To be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. So, yeah, he said that John the Baptist was Elijah. Maybe it's not necessarily, I don't know. But maybe there's something about it I don't understand. It could be interpreted as him saying, that he was him. But I want to believe in reincarnation, but I don't think there's enough evidence. Lots of faking going on. Yeah, isn't that always the problem? Okay, I need to go back to, what am I doing? Heidi. No. Nope. Okay. I'm really sorry. I'm like so anxious right now. It's ridiculous. Okay. Let's go.
Sammy, come talk to Mommy for a minute.
It's just a coincidence.
Sam's mother became intrigued by her son's statements. She started testing him with questions about his grandfather. She showed him a class photo of when his grandfather was in grammar school.
Sammy, do you recognize anyone in this photo?
There I am.
No, Sammy, that's your grandpa when he was a boy.
No, that's me.
When I looked at the picture, even after having looked at the other pictures of his grandfather, I really would not have been able to say with any certainty which boy I thought was the grandfather. And of course, Sam was 4 at the time that he did this.
Some children not only remember their past life, but the afterlife as well.
About 20% of the children will describe events between the time when the previous person died and when the child was born. Some of them describe basically sort of hanging out either where the previous person lived or where the previous person died. So they may describe their funeral. Then there are other children who talk about going to other realms like heaven, things like that. Some of them will talk about seeing other beings there or talking with God.
I died and shot up to heaven. God gave me a ticket that let me come back down to earth.
This is not part of our everyday experience to have people talking about past lives. If the children are able to describe memories that then turn out to be accurate for somebody who lived and died in the past, then this suggests that memories or something connected with memories can carry.
So I brought up some links, some pages about genetic memory as well, because, yeah, I don't know, maybe it could just be that, having memories of things, because it is talking about them having been like their own grandfather. There were quite a few of those where it's like kids saying that they were their own parents' parents.
Over, possibly
Oh,
after
everywhere.
the death of the body. I've had a number of friends and acquaintances who have said that their children, when they were 2 or 3, would make one sort of unusual statement. Like there's one woman who said her child said, "In my last life, I drove a big truck." This was as they were riding down the road one day. Never said anything else. And, you don't make too much of that. But in these cases, the children don't stop after 1 or 2 statements.
When children continue
I was waiting to say genetic memory. Yeah, has that been proven? I think that is something that was scientifically proven.
to talk about having had a past life,
And also the collective unconscious, Carl Jung kind of thing.
they may offer more specific details.
Do you remember your family?
Some people turned my sister into a fish.
Who turned her into a fish?
Some bad guys. She died.
The father had only recently heard about the sister being murdered 60 years before.
Turned her into
And then
a
her
fish?
body had been dumped in the bay. And he felt absolutely certain that the boy had never heard about it.
Some people point out what they believe to be flaws in Tucker's studies.
how do we know all these things actually happened? That is, the boy said this, he pointed there. I mean, I presume these are anecdotes and stories told by the parents, recounted to the author, who then writes them down. We know from research on memory, from research on how much parents influence their children, and the reconstruction of events and how unreliable that is, exactly how that can be distorted.
Some people have argued that it's the parents' enthusiasm for a case that makes it stronger than it really is. So one of the things we code for is the parents' initial attitude about a case. And when I looked, I found that, in fact, the initial attitude has no correlation whatsoever with how strong the case ultimately appears to be.
Memories aren't the only signs of a former life. In Dr. Tucker's cases, a more rare occurrence is when physical characteristics carry over from one body to another, from one life to the next.
In a number of our cases, the
Yeah,
child
that's
is
the weird
born with a birthmark or a birth defect that matches a wound, usually a fatal wound, on the body of the previous person. This is something that's fairly common. Most of these are not the usual blemishes that a lot of people have, but they can be quite specific or unusual markings. There's a little boy in Thailand named Chloe. When his grandmother was dying, she expressed a wish to come back as a man. And then when she died...
Oh yeah, so I tried to do like a past life regression hypnosis thing that I found a guided meditation on YouTube, and I fell asleep. It convinced me too much. It convinced me too well that I was relaxed, and I fell asleep. But I did start to have a dream that I was a man in a black cloak, but I think that was just a dream.
Her daughter-in-law took some white paste and ran her finger down the back of the neck of the body. Then Chloe was born a few years later and had this white mark on the back of his neck that looked just like someone running a finger down the back of his neck. Then when he got old enough to talk, he talked about having been his grandmother, said how her rice field belonged to him, and made statements like that.
A common practice in several Asian countries involves marking the dying relative with soot or paste. When the soul is reincarnated, the family can recognize its rebirth by this mark.
Certainly, I think the birthmarks and birth defects argue that there is something that has carried that trauma with it to another life and then affected the fetus.
Of Tucker's 2,500 cases, more than 2,000 of them involved violent or unusual deaths. His data suggests that physical trauma in one life can carry over, that the mind can remember past violence and inflict it on a new body.
There's a famous case of a man who relived an event where he was tied up and developed what looked like rope marks on his arm. So there are examples of mental images producing very specific marks on the body.
What are the conclusions that Dr. Tucker draws from this intriguing data?
I think the best explanation for our strongest cases is that memories, emotions, and even physical traumas sometimes can carry on from one life to another. The explanation for how this carryover occurs largely remains to be elucidated, but in general terms, the idea is...
So the Telegram, I just changed it to 2.0. So if you just search Heady Remarks 2.0, because I didn't have any of the permissions. And yeah, so I had to start a new one. And yeah,
consciousness is not purely a creation of the brain. So consciousness could be considered a separate entity from the physical brain and then could continue on in another life.
The idea of reincarnation sets up...
I had to update the notes on like every single video.
A number of possibilities regarding the existence of the soul. Survivors of clinical death may also provide a glimpse into what happens after death.
Is that the end? Okay. Moving right along. Oh, here it is. What major religions believe in reincarnation? So, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Kabbalah Judaism. And then the ones that don't: Christianity, Islam, Shintoism, and Zoroastrianism. Oh, it didn't mention Judaism on that one. I think I don't know. Okay, I'm going to talk about this case, the case of the Pullock twins. This was something I found out about a long time ago that I thought was really interesting. I'll just read it to you. In 1957, John and Florence Pullock lost their 2 daughters to a reckless driver who carelessly sped around town. A year later, they gave birth to twin daughters who were the spitting image of their dead sisters. I mean, are they? Are these the older sisters? I'm not sure they look. So this is leaving out a lot. Hold on, I might have a better one. In the celebrated British reincarnation case, 2 young sisters who died in a road accident appeared to be reborn as twins to the same parents. So the father was Catholic, and it's weird because he was convinced before these twins were born that their daughters were going to be reborn, and he just insisted on it, I guess, and he was convinced that would happen. Archie. And yeah, so the older sisters who had died were not twins, but whatever. I guess they don't have to be. And yeah, some lady was like suicidal, driving crazy, and I don't know if she meant to kill them or if she was just mental. She was on some drug, driving like a maniac. So she was upset about, I think, having lost custody of her kids, and she went on some crazy kind of suicidal drive that ended up killing these 2 girls and another boy that they were walking with. Okay, so family background. John Pollock was born in Bristol in 1920 and was raised in the Church of England before converting to Catholicism. Florence Pollock grew up as a member of the Salvation Army and became Catholic upon marrying John. Despite his Christian faith, John also believed strongly in reincarnation, which he first encountered in a novel at the age of 9. John later told interviewers that at night he would pray to God for evidence of reincarnation, proving himself right and the priests wrong. The Pollocks left the church in the 1960s. At the time of the twins' birth, John believed strongly in reincarnation, but Florence did not. Joanna Pollock, born in 1946, was the couple's 3rd child and first daughter. In 1951, following a family move to Hexham in Northumberland, their 2nd daughter, Jacqueline, was born. As their parents were preoccupied with their grocery and milk delivery business, their daughters were raised mostly by their maternal grandmother. The girls were inseparable. Joanna liked to mother Jacqueline, which the younger girl accepted. Joanna liked wearing costumes and acting in plays she made up. She was generous and shared freely with other children. Both girls liked combing people's hair, especially their fathers. I used to do that. Joanna had a premonition she would never grow up, often saying, "I will never be a lady." At the age of 3, Jacqueline fell into a bucket, an accident that caused a small gash on her forehead over her right eye near the root of her nose. Root? This formed a permanent scar that was slightly depressed and was especially visible in cold weather. Jacqueline also had a roundish dark birthmark on the left side of her waist. On May 7, 1957, when Joanna was 11 and Jacqueline 6, they were struck by a car and killed while walking to church with a friend. The driver was a local woman who had decided to commit suicide by driving after taking what she thought were lethal quantities of aspirin and phenobarbital. Witnesses saw her driving erratically and bearing down on the children, who were blocked from escape by a wall beside the sidewalk. The impact tossed them into the air like cricket balls. And both were killed instantly. The incident made headlines throughout Britain. Their parents were devastated, but while Florence tried to avoid thinking about the girls, John devoted himself to doing so. On the day of the accident, he experienced a vision of them in heaven. Then he sensed the presence of their spirits in a top room of the house and took to spending time there in order to be close to them. He later said he felt the girls' deaths had been punishment from God for having prayed for proof of reincarnation, but he also felt that his prayer would be answered by his daughters being reborn into the family. Florence objected to this notion, and for a time the dispute threatened their marriage. Florence soon became pregnant again, and John became convinced that Joanna and Jacqueline were about to reincarnate into the family as twins. Florence rejected this belief, and her doctor predicted a single birth based on palpation, fetal heartbeat, and the lack of twins in either parent's family. However, Florence bore twin girls on October 4th, 1958, and they were named Jillian and Jennifer. Jennifer had a birthmark that looked like Jacqueline's scar and a second birthmark in the same place as Jacqueline's birthmark on her hip, I guess. Ian Stevenson got involved, apparently. Stevenson's investigation. Pioneering reincarnation researcher Ian Stevenson, is that linkable? Investigated the case after learning about it through newspaper coverage in 1963. That same year, when the twins were 4 years old, he met the family at their home, interviewed the parents at length, and examined the girls for birthmarks. He met the family again in 1967 and corresponded with them until next visiting them in 1978 when the twins were 20. At that point, he had blood tests arranged to determine their zygosity, which showed they were monozygotic, identical. Florence Pollock died in 1979. Stevenson visited John and his new wife, as well as Jillian, in 1982 and continued to correspond with John until his death in 1985. Stephen wrote a detailed case report in the second volume of Reincarnation and Biology, a contribution to the etiology of birthmarks and birth defects, and summarized versions in 2 other works. Statements made by Jillian and Jennifer. Jillian and Jennifer made several statements and recognitions relating to Joanna and Jacqueline between the ages of 3 and 7. When the twins were about 3, the parents brought out the toys that had belonged to their deceased daughters and which had been boxed and stored in the attic. Jillian claimed the doll that had belonged to Joanna and Jennifer Jillian claimed the doll that had belonged to Joanna, and Jennifer claimed the one that had belonged to Jacqueline. So they knew which toys were theirs. When Jillian saw a toy clothes wringer that had also been a Santa Claus present to Joanna, she said, "There is my toy wringer," adding that Santa had brought it. The girls quarreled over none of the toys. Okay. Florence Pollock occasionally overheard Jillian and Jennifer discussing the details of the accident. Once she came across Jillian cradling Jennifer's head, saying, "The blood's coming out of your eyes. That's where the car hit you." John Pollock recalled that when he identified the bodies, Jacqueline's head had been bandaged above the eyes. Jillian once pointed to Jennifer's forehead birthmark and said, "That is the mark Jennifer got when she fell on a bucket." Florence had worn a smock while helping John with the milk delivery business, but put it away when she ceased that work shortly after her daughter's deaths. When the twins were about 4 and a half, John wore the smock to do some painting, and Jennifer asked him, "Why are you wearing Mummy's coat?" She then became annoyed at Jillian for not recognizing it. The older sister had been at school and had not seen her mother wearing the garment. When John asked Jennifer how she knew the smock was Florence's, Jennifer said her mother had worn it while delivering milk. The Pollocks had moved away from Hexham when the twins were about 9 months old. When they were about 4 years old, the family visited Hexham again for the first time. As they walked toward a park, but were not yet inside of it, Jillian and Jennifer said they wanted to go across the road to the park and the swings, and clearly showed that they knew the way. When the girls complained about the lunch they were having at home, their mother said they could have lunch at school, and they answered, "We've done that before." This was not true of Jillian and Jennifer, but had been true of Joanna and Jacqueline. The Hexham recognitions are recounted by John Pollock in this video. Oh, I want to see that.
One Sunday morning, the tragedy struck John Pollock and his family. His 2 daughters and a friend were killed by a car on their way to church.
German.
Jacqueline was 6 and Joanna 11 when they died, but John Pollock did not despair while Hexham grieved. He believed that his wife would conceive twins, that the girls would be reborn.
From the moment I knew she was pregnant, I believed that the girls would come back.
And against all the doctor's predictions, Florence Pollock did produce twin girls.
The first thing I noticed when I saw those twins was, we hadn't named them then, but the younger one of the 2 had a scar coming across her forehead down onto the bridge of her nose, which was the identical scar that Jacqueline, the younger one of the girls that had been killed, had when she fell off a little tricycle when she was about 2 years old. Also, I didn't see at the time, but later, my wife said to me, it's an incredible thing, but she's also got the birthmark on her left hip that Jacqueline had. Jacqueline had a birthmark on her left hip, which was like a brown thumbprint.
To this day, Jennifer still has that brown birthmark. Mrs. Pollock was astonished when she gave the twins the dead girl's dolls.
When I got these two dolls out, one said, oh, that's Mary, and that's Susan.
Oh, yeah.
It was exactly the same
They knew the names that the previous girls had given the dolls.
names as my other daughters had named them. And that was the sort of really turning point in my way of thinking.
The family had moved away after the tragedy, but on their first visit to Hexham, the twins seemed to remember the landmarks.
Well, when we came at the top of Battle Hill, they came over the brow, approaching St. Mary's Church, which they couldn't see. One turned to the other and said, well, the school's around here, which we used to go to, and the playground's round the back. Now, they couldn't possibly have seen any sign of a school or a church even. I mean, they were so small, they couldn't even have seen over the wall. And sure enough, I mean, the school is round the corner. And this was the most incredible thing. And we continued to walk on. I mean, we were absolutely amazed at this. And as we came past the church, on the opposite side of the road is Hexham Abbey and the Abbey grounds. And one turned and said, oh, the playground's over there.
And she was right. The playground was over there, but they couldn't see it from where they were standing because the brow of the hill was in the way. So convinced were the Pollocks that their daughters had been reborn, that even the children's grave no longer held any sorrow for them.
There's a grave there, but it means nothing. To me, to bring flowers or anything on the grave would be sheer hypocrisy, because I don't believe that they're here. I mean, it's just a symbol of two girls that lived that were reborn.
Huh. Interesting. So, according to John Pollock, when the twins discussed the accident between themselves, they often spoke in the present tense, almost as if they were reliving it. Oh yeah, that's another thing about past life regression. I guess it can be kind of traumatic, having to relive traumatic events of a past life. So there are people who read the Akashic Records for you, so you don't have to do like the hypnosis and actually experience these things. The twins displayed behaviors that were similar to those of their deceased sisters. Like the older girls, they were very close, and Jillian liked Mother Did I already read that? The twins looked most to their paternal grandmother, who had done most to raise Joanna and Jacqueline, for guidance and love, even though Florence was now entirely available. Also, like their elder sisters, the twins damn it, getting deja vu. Okay, birthmarks, monozygotic, criticisms, and alternative explanations. Yeah, there are people who really talk a lot of shit on like Ian Stevenson, and of course, people who want to believe in like strictly materialistic idea of the universe, I guess, which I think is a little bit low IQ personally, to be strictly materialistic. It just I don't know, doesn't seem entirely. I have nothing to base that on. I don't know. I pulled up some links about consciousness outside of brain, just because I'm kind of obsessed with that idea. Okay, so what is an alternative explanation? Wilson proposes maternal impression, writing it can scarcely be doubted that during her pregnancy with the twins, Florence Pollock must have played and replayed in her mind the events of the life and death of her earlier daughters. However, he concedes that the other cases investigated by Stevenson cannot be explained in this way, as the life remembered is in a different family and sometimes a distant location, ruling out any possibility of the mother having normal awareness of the past life circumstances. Richard Rockley, writing for the website Skeptic Report, suggests that John Pollock, since he believed strongly in reincarnation, most likely talked about his notion that the twins were reincarnations of their sisters in their presence. Also, other family members and friends might have talked about the accident and their deaths. He also suggested the parents could also be reading too much into the twins' statements or could be lying. As Wilson notes, however, birthmarks that match past life birthmark scars or wounds, which none of Rockley's theories would explain are found not only in the Pullock case, but in a substantial portion of reincarnation cases. Stevenson found that of 895 cases in his collection in which the previous incarnation was identified, 35% involved birthmarks or birth defects. Stevenson writes that John Pullock responded to a journalist who made the same suggestion by saying that if he had not believed in reincarnation, he would not have shared with anyone the similarities that he and his wife had noticed, and there would almost certainly have been no case or none worth reporting. Stevenson, who studied 42 pairs of twins who remembered past lives, concluded that the Pullock's twin case, together with that of another pair of monozygotic twins who display variant appearance and behavior, Indica and Kakshapa Ishwara, provides some of the strongest existing evidence in favor of reincarnation. It was all very uncanny. Oh, they developed a phobia of cars. Similarities spooked Florence and John, but that wasn't all. The girls also suffered from recurring nightmares about getting hit by a car, often waking up at night drenched in sweat and yelling, "The car! The car! It's coming for us!" Is that the one I just watched? I'm going to X out. Oh, here they are as adults. Then and 30 years later. So this is Amit Goswami, is the guy who wrote The Physics of the Soul. And yeah, so this is like, it's called Quantum Spirituality. He tries to get scientific about it. I have some, oh God, too many links. I can't find what I pulled up. In quantum physics, objects are possibilities residing in a domain of potentiality outside of space and time. In this domain, no signals are required for communication when two objects are in a state of correlation or entanglement. Communication is instantaneous. Such instant communication is forbidden in space and time, where communication must take place through an exchange of signals, and that has a speed limit. Communication takes a little time for signals to go through the distance that separates the objects. In contrast, the domain of non-locality, signal-less communication, is a domain of potential unity. Closer examination reveals that this domain of potential unity is consciousness and its potentialities, and the domain of space and time is what consciousness experiences by becoming immanent and separating itself into a self, and the other objects in the process of converting potentiality. Okay, this is too much. I don't know about that. Yeah, I have this. This was like a little PDF that came with the book, Physics of the Soul. I got a copy on it. But yeah, it talks about the double slit experiment. He says that by observing the electron, you know, we collapse. Let's say it says we collapse. When we look, we collapse the electron's wave to localize at one place, but between our observations, an electron spreads out as a wave of possibility and transcendent potentia. I don't know. I don't really understand this, honestly. Oh, this is not really related to much, but I was also interested in this idea of water having memory recently. Maybe I'll come back to that. Okay, so this states the brain doesn't create consciousness. So the materialists say that kind of like digestion or metabolism, consciousness is created by the brain. But people who don't believe that have more of an idea that consciousness is filtered by the brain. I'm not sharing the screen, I just realized, but whatever, I don't have to. So this is by Paul Marshall, mysticism scholar and philosopher, author of Mystical Encounters with the Natural World and the shape of the soul. The materialist assumption that consciousness is produced by the brain is on the decline. New theories such as panpsychism, the idea that consciousness exists through the physical universe, are on the rise. So basically just the idea that consciousness is a property of the universe that is there, and then it is filtered through our sense organs and brain and flesh. But it's going to be there regardless. So the notion that the brain acts as a reducing valve for consciousness was supported by the likes of Henry Bergson and Aldous Huxley and could offer our best alternative to the materialist worldview, writes Paul Marshall. Consciousness is generated by the brain, isn't it? Neuroscientists have commonly assumed so, and it is easy to understand why. Our everyday experiences are highly dependent on the brain and the nervous system. For example, a stiff blow to the head knocks the living daylights out, as adult boxers can attest. Damage to the primary visual cortex at the rear of the brain shuts down consciousness. Ooh, you're on fire. Water memory, genetic memory intertwined. Yeah, I'm pretty obsessed with the idea of consciousness of surviving outside of your body, because I guess a lot of people have been interested in that subject ever since forever. Okay, so rear of the brain shuts down conscious visual perception. Alterations to the brain's neurotransmitter chemistry through illness or psychoactive drugs impacts on perception, cognition, and mood. Psychedelics such as LSD and mescaline can have particularly dramatic effects ranging from superlative highs to abject lows. Plainly, consciousness, or at least consciousness as we ordinarily know it, is highly dependent on the brain. However, it may be a step too far to assume that consciousness is produced by the brain. Dependence is not the same as production. Consider some analogies. Cool, clean air flows from a conditioning unit, but the unit does not produce the air. Oh, God, there's my cat. Oh, shit. Dude, my cat is... I gave her some drugs because I think she's in pain. I have a vet appointment on Wednesday for her. Hold on, I have to go comfort her for a second. I'm sorry. Judy! Oh my God, she is so old. So old. Yeah, that's just another thing I've been kind of dealing with is my old kitty. I feel like they're going to take one look at her and tell me she needs to be put down. Yeah. My God. Welcome. Okay, so, yeah. Dependent on the brain. Okay, air conditioning unit. It merely extracts air from outside, cooling it and filtering out impurities. A wash basin tap does not generate water, it just regulates the flow. Sunlight floods into a room when the blinds are opened, but the blinds do not create light. They permit transmission of light into the room. Are you okay? I mean, she's obviously not. I gave her some, it's like hemp, basically. I got it at Petco. Poor kitty. Poor kitty. Here, lay down here. Ugh. Analogies of this kind proved useful when, at the close of the 19th century, several philosophers and psychologists, notably William James, Frederick Myers, F.C.S. Schiller, and Henry Bergson, dissented from the growing physiological reductionism of the time and came up with an alternative to the production theory of brain action. Oh, she doesn't want to stay here. I don't know what to do with her, honestly. Okay, Judy. Here, I don't want her to hurt herself trying to hop down. Take it easy, Judes. She's like at death's door. So, these people I just named dissented from the growing physiological reductionism of the time and came up with an alternative to the production theory of brain action. This was the filter or transmission theory of brain action, or filter theory for short. Here the brain plays a key role too, but rather than producing consciousness, it draws upon pre-existing consciousness. The operative words are filter, transmit, permit, channel, select, extract, limit, regulate, condition, modify, not produce, generate, or create. Filter theorists maintain that everyday consciousness is supported by a hidden field or reservoir of consciousness. The idea arose at a time when the concept of subconscious mind had been receiving much attention. Some thinkers, such as physiologist W.B. Carpenter, understood subconscious mental activity in purely physiological terms, as unconscious cerebration, while others were willing to attribute consciousness to the subconscious. James Myers, Pierre Janet, and others understood dual or multiple personality as evidence of hidden states of consciousness coexistent with the everyday one. This notion of subliminal or transmarginal consciousness promised to shed light on a diverse range of puzzling phenomena, abnormal, normal, and supernormal, from sleepwalking and hysteria through memory and dreaming to creativity, psychical phenomena, and mystical experience. While it may be supposed that subliminal consciousness is confined to individual minds, there is reason to think that it extends further afield, as psychical phenomena such as telepathy and clairvoyance suggest, and perhaps much further too if cosmic mystical experiences are indicative. Hence, Edward F. Kelly, 2015, has given the name Rasta, or resonant opening to subliminal and transpersonal assets, to these filter theories. Without taking a definite stand on the reach of the subliminal, James spoke of the mother sea of consciousness in his Ingersoll lecture of 1897. Human Immortality, a classic exposition of filter theory. Decades later, author and thinker Aldous Huxley, who revived filter theory for the coming psychedelic generation in his mescaline-infused book, The Doors of Perception, called it Mind at Large. According to the filter theory, ordinary or supraliminal consciousness derives from the subliminal sea of consciousness through the limiting activity of matter, or more specifically, the brain and nervous system and associated psychological processes. These act as a filter or selector, taking some subliminal context for inclusion in supraliminal consciousness while excluding a great deal. In Huxley's words, the brain and nervous system act as a reducing valve through which mind at large is funneled. The selection and exclusion of subliminal contents are driven by utilitarian and survival needs. In many circumstances, only that which is immediately useful to an organism or necessary for its survival will be provided. Perception usually has to be kept narrow and focused. The filter has a protective function too, for the sheer volume of available contents would be overwhelming, or the character of the contents potentially distressing. When the normal functioning of biological and psychological filters changes, such as with drug use, I guess, say through meditative quieting of mind chatter, relaxation of the survival imperative, physical or mental trauma, and psychoactive drugs, then previously excluded contents may enter supraliminal consciousness. In this way, filter theory tries to account for a range of abnormal and supernormal phenomena. The originators of filter theory were well aware that they had couched theory in analogies and metaphorical language without providing concrete details of a mechanism. Their intention was to show that there is an alternative way of thinking about the functioning of the brain and nervous system. Heidi! Hello! Welcome, Shane. While brain science of the time shed little light on filtering mechanisms, some metaphysical observations could be made. When James first... Oh, God damn it. I'm sorry. I'm like super distracted. Okay. When James first presented filter theory, he expressed it in the terms of mind-body dualism. A purely material brain filters consciousness, but he did so only to counter the prevailing type of dualism, according to which a purely material brain produces consciousness. He was open to alternative kinds of metaphysics, such as idealism and neutral monism, in which brain and consciousness are not different in kind. These non-materialist monisms have the advantage of sidestepping the mind-body problem, the difficulty of bringing a purely material brain into relation with consciousness. Bergson took such a route. His filter theory, set out in Matière et Mémoire, that's French, I guess, 1896, addressed normal perception and memory, drawing on the evidence of speech and memory pathologies, although he later applied it to telepathy and near-death life reviews. The metaphysical backdrop to his theory can be considered neutral monist, the basic elements of the universe being regarded as neutral with respect to mind and matter. Like the rest of the universe, the brain and body are made up of neutral images, and so perception operates through the selection of one set of images by... It's losing me. One contemporary model of psychedelic action called Rebus, relaxed beliefs under psychedelics. That's a weird acronym. That's not, okay. Doesn't really match the letters. Has links with the old filter theories insofar as maintains that psychedelics work by relaxing high-level beliefs, such as the concept of self, thereby liberating bottom-up information flow. Consisting of signaling from the brain's limbic system and elsewhere, Rebus, however, is not a filter theory of the kind discussed above, in which the relaxation of psychobiological filters taps into a subliminal consciousness. It is not a Huxleyan Rasta model of reducing valves and mind at large. Rebus has no explicit place for subliminal consciousness, never mind one that reaches beyond the individual mind and brain into the world at large. It is therefore debatable whether Rebus can engage successfully with the full range of psychedelic phenomenology as it claims to do, especially mystical and near-death-like experiences and parapsychological phenomena. For these, mind at large may have to be given a role. The idea of consciousness beyond the brain is not quite the taboo it was when physicalist metaphysics ruled the roost. Nowadays, there is vigorous discussion of alternatives to physicalism among philosophers, including panpsychism, cosmopsychism, neutral and dual aspect monisms, and idealist monism. The time is right for renewed engagement with filter theory that embraces not only neuropsychological details, but metaphysical foundations too. Okay, got through that. So I pulled up this thing. Get rid of that. Hold on, that's not the right one. It was like, it was talking about the monad or the oversoul. Maybe it's on this one. Okay, X out of that, X out of that. Near-death experience. I also pulled up Stargate. It's like a government project studying remote viewing. Okay, let's share this actually. So this is the science of reincarnation. When Ryan Hammonds was 4 years old, he began directing imaginary movies. Shouts of action often echoed from his room, but the play became a concern for Ryan's parents when he began waking up in the middle of the night screaming and clutching his chest, saying he dreamed his heart exploded when he was in Hollywood. His mother, Cindy, asked his doctor about the episodes. Night terrors, the doctor said. He'll outgrow them. Then one night, as Cindy tucked Ryan into bed, Ryan suddenly took hold of Cindy's hand. You should dig into CERN. Yeah, I hear they might be creating an alternate timeline right now. They're doing something. I don't even understand what they do. I mean, we did do an episode about that, but I had to delete it. Mama, he said, I think I used to be someone else. He said he remembered a big white house and a swimming pool. It was in Hollywood, many miles from his Oklahoma home. He said he had 3 sons, but that he couldn't remember their names. He began to cry, asking Cindy over and over why he couldn't remember their names. I really didn't know what to do, Cindy said. I was more in shock than anything. He was so insistent about it. After that night, he kept talking about it, kept getting upset about not being able to remember those names. I started researching the internet about reincarnation. I even got some books from the library on Hollywood, thinking their pictures might help him. I didn't tell anyone for months. One day, as Ryan and Cindy paged through one of the Hollywood books, Ryan stopped at a black and white still taken from a 1930s movie, Night After Night. 2 men in the center of the picture were confronting one another. 4 other men surrounded them. Cindy didn't recognize any of the faces, but Ryan pointed to one of the men in the middle. "Hey, Mama," he said, "that's George. We did a picture together." His finger then shot over to a man on the right wearing an overcoat and a scowl. "That guy's me. I found me!" Ryan's claims, while rare, are not unique among the more than 2,500 case files sitting inside the offices of Jim B. Tucker. Oh, Judy, come on. Oh my goodness, this sucks. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Judy. Come here. She stops when I hold her, so I'll just hold on to her. It's so sad. I'm so sorry. Poor Judy. Sorry. Just pet her. Jim Tucker, an associate psychiatry professor at the UVA Medical Center's Division of Perceptual Studies. For nearly 15 years, Tucker has been investigating claims made by children, usually between the ages of 2 and 6 years old, who say they've had past lives. The children are sometimes able to provide enough detail about those lives that their stories can be traced back to an actual person. Rarely famous, and often entirely unknown to the family who died years before. Reincarnation by the numbers. Tucker's research has yielded interesting patterns within the cases of children claiming memories of a past life. 60% of children who claim past life memories are male. Roughly 70% of the children claim they died of violent or unnatural death. In those cases, just over 70% of the deceased individuals were male, the same ratio as in the general population. 90% of the children say they were the same sex in a previous life as they are now. The median time between claimed death and birth is 16 months. So it's not immediate, I guess. 20% of children claim memories of the time between death and birth. And most children claiming this are between the ages of 2 and 6. The median age at the time of the previous person's death is 28. Tucker, one of the only scientists in the world studying the phenomenon, says the strength of the cases he encounters varies. Some can be easily discounted, for instance, when it becomes clear that a child's innocuous statements come within a family that desperately misses a loved one. But in a number of the cases like Ryan's, Tucker says the most logical scientific explanation for a claim is as simple as it is astounding. Somehow, the child recalls memories from another life. I understand the leap it takes to conclude there is something beyond what we can see and touch, says Tucker, who served as a medical director of the university's Child and Family Psychiatry Clinic for nearly a decade. But there is this evidence here that needs to be accounted for, and when we look at these cases carefully, some sort of carryover of memories often makes the most sense. In his latest book, Return to Life, due out this month, I don't know when this Tucker details some of the more compelling American cases he's researched and outlines his argument that discoveries within quantum mechanics, the mind-bending science of how nature's smallest particles behave, provide clues to reincarnation's existence. Quantum physics indicates that our physical world may grow out of our consciousness, Tucker says. That's a view held not just by me, but by a number of physicists as well. So they think we create reality? Consciousness creates reality? Okay, I need to find the monad page. Stargate. Near-death experience. Here's this thing that I was looking at. Non-local correlations. Once correlated at some origin, if one subject sees a light flash, the other sees it too. Is this just a metaphor? What is that? Consciousness mediates the transfer of electric potential from one correlated brain to another. Instantaneous non-local collapse of brainwave in two locally separated observers. Yeah, I don't really understand this. I really want to find the page talking about this. It's the oversoul. It's like, oh, This is also about Quantum Activist Workbook. I have a video of him pulled up talking, but he's got like a really thick accent. In modern times, the psychologist Carl Jung codified 4 categories of personality traits: sensing type, feeling type, thinking type, and the intuitive type. Putting the 2 systems together within the ground of consciousness yields us 4 different worlds of possibilities. Material possibilities that we sense when we collapse them. Vital possibilities that we feel. Mental possibilities that we think, and supramental possibilities that we intuit. We have an existence and a body in each of these worlds. The bodies do not directly interact, rather consciousness non-locally mediates their interaction. In this way, mind-body dualism is avoided, creating a breakthrough in philosophical thinking. Okay, I swear I pulled up a page talking about what is this? Decoding the Neuroscience of Consciousness. A growing understanding of consciousness could lead to fresh treatments for brain injuries and phobias. Okay, seriously, let's find it. I'm just going to go one by one. Ah, there it is. Found it. Okay, so one of the explanations for why so many people think they might have been Napoleon or, famous people was that this idea that there could be like an oversoul that like is split into multiple souls. Like one book I was listening to was suggesting that people could be, I guess that's sort of a similar idea as soulmates or kindred spirits, is like that they could be in multiple people at once, not necessarily always individual lives at different times. Okay, so the title of this article expresses a question which many students of theosophy have been asking themselves for over a century. The word monad is generally defined in dictionaries as meaning primary unit, ultimate unit. In some of the more basic and foundational textbooks of theosophy, such as The Key to Theosophy by H.P. Blavatsky and The Ocean of Theosophy by William Q. Judge, the term monad is used quite simply and applies to the conjunction of the 2 highest principles of the inner spiritual constitution of the human being, namely Atma and Buddhi, which are usually termed the 7th and 6th principles of man. Atma being pure eternal spirit, one with the absolute, infinite, omnipresent divine principle, can effectively have no connection with or influence on anything differentiated, manifested, or conditioned, except through Buddhi, the spiritual soul, which serves as the vehicle through which the divine light and radiance of Atma shines through to Manas, the next highest principle, and which is our reincarnating ego, our permanent individuality, the mind entity, or human soul, which has been described and explained at some length in articles such as Ego is Not a Bad Word, and Manas, the mystery of mind. When the higher Manas principle is first awakened and activated in animal man, as occurred for this Earth's humanity in the latter part of the 3rd root race. Oh, here we go again, root races. The Lemurian epic, millions of years ago, the monad can be considered to have become individualized in a sense and to have gained its own ego, its own I. Without this additional presence of Manas as the connecting link between the monad and the earthly personality, Atma Buddhi remains for a man nothing more than pure abstraction in a state of absolute subjectivity and inactivity. Okay, it's losing me. It's like the higher self. Manas is something individual, whilst Atma and Buddhi are universal principles, one and the same for all. I don't really understand this. Yeah, karma. I don't know. Oh shit! It's been an hour. Ah! I don't really know. I don't know what I'm doing. This is Raymond Moody.
The third kind of experience that people have that relate to the possibility of reincarnation are past life regressions, the hypnotic induction of a trance to regress people back. I first heard about this from a friend, or I first experimented with it myself through a friend of mine named Diana Denholm, who is a clinical psychologist in Florida. And Diana was using hypnosis not for the purpose of past.
He wrote that book, Life After Life. Okay, go on.
Life regression, but rather for the normal things it's used for, to help people stop smoking and this sort of thing. And she began to use it to try to help people understand their early lives. And she said several times it would happen when she would regress people back to their early childhood, that they wouldn't stop there and they would sort of spontaneously pop back into a previous existence. So that interested her in this. And then she began to do it as part of her practice. And so I got interested in it. I must consider, I am just so crass in so many of my prejudices and so on, as I increasingly realize as I get older. But I remember very specifically the attitude that I had toward the idea of past life regression when I was hearing this. And that was that I assumed, what you hear in the popular press is that everybody is either Napoleon or Cleopatra, right? Or that the people who can do this are very suggestible or histrionic people. But what I quickly learned is that that's just not correct. It's I've taken maybe 300 or so of my students through the years through this past life regression experience, and all that experience I've never had any of them relate being a famous person, or all of them were just very mundane lives. And so I don't know what to make of this hypnotic regression. I just don't know. But those are my impressions, is that it's not what the popular view tells you, that it's, people are always somebody famous. It doesn't work that way. One question that the whole notion of reincarnation raises is, what is it that survives? It's like, as I've come to acknowledge or realize, I guess, in the past 3 years or so, I've acknowledged now, to my utter surprise, there is an afterlife. I'm still reeling from that realization. But therefore, the question becomes even more acute than, what is it that survives? And if you take the classical answers to this in the West, it begins with the notion of the soul. And Plato, for example, had a very elaborate theory of the soul, that the soul is an immaterial entity that inhabits the body. And to Plato, the essence of our personal identity is the soul. The body is secondary and unreal. The soul and the consciousness is the real part to Plato, and the material substance of the body is always changing and in flux or flow, and not intelligible and not real. And so his idea was that the essence of a personal identity.
That is what all the most wise people all the most wise people say, that the physical world is an illusion. It's not the main thing. That consciousness is the thing.
Identity is this immaterial,
this is temporary
thing or entity or substance called the soul. And this was taken up in Western thought, as we all know, through the Middle Ages and so on, into the church. And it was only, say, in the 17th century that real objections and concerns began to be raised about this. And Thomas Hobbes, for example, in the 17th century raised the objection that the idea of an immaterial entity or immaterial substance is self-contradictory and nonsensical. But still the question was, what is it that constitutes our personal identity? And so then 100 years or so elapsed, and then along came John Locke, who thought that the essence of what makes a person the person that person is are our memories. That
Broken 76 says, totally agree with that. The world is just the greatest show on earth. Yeah, it could be a hologram, apparently.
in effect, we are our memories, and that's what makes us up. And this becomes highly dubious when you realize what a flimsy thing memory is and how it's constantly changing. It's not really
a dream.
As stable as we imagine.
All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream.
And then in the 18th century, Hume came along and said, well, in his own introspective process, when he looked inside of himself, he could never find any sort of underlying substrate of a
Bill Hicks. What does it say? We are all one entity experiencing itself subjectively. There's no such thing as death. Life is an illusion, and we are the imaginations of ourselves.
It was always the only thing he could catch in action were individual perceptions or ideas or feelings or whatever, and that he couldn't introspect or intuit any underlying self that was the basis of all these things. So that is a sketch, more or less, of how thought about personal identity and what it is that could survive bodily death has gone in the Western intellectual tradition. And so what do I think about it? Well, this realization I had several years ago, or coming to terms with the idea that there does appear to be an afterlife, really set me to thinking about that what is it that constitutes the identity of a person that is passed along or escaped?
I think he's the one that did a Life After Life. I think that's his book where he talks about, there's those stories where people are clinically dead, their heart is stopped, and they're witnessing conversations and things happening that they shouldn't be able to perceive because they are no longer, their body is not alive. People who came back, but were dead and knew things like that the doctor was saying. And yeah, that would indicate that consciousness does not need to necessarily, it doesn't need a body to exist. So perceiving telepathically or something.
This life to go into some other one. And long about that time, one of my favorite authors is Elie Wiesel, and I hope many of you have had the pleasure.
Oh, God.
And I was reading one of
Let's skip that.
Developed, the uncanny but undeniable impression developed as they looked back at their life that it had been a sort of script or a play or a drama. And then when I read that Elie Wiesel said, it just came
God,
together.
I don't like him.
In this musical comedy, there was a really terrific comic villain, complete with dark stovepipe hat and the black cape, the whole thing. And at the end of the play, when all the performers came out for their curtain call, when the hero and heroine came out, wild applause, and the supporting actors and actresses came out, wild applause. And then the villain came out, and silence. think about it. And it was really fascinating because...
Let's stop. I don't know, Jim Tucker? This is the guy who wrote the physics of the soul.
Beautiful sentence. I became very interested. We choose our own reality. This guy's name is Fred Alan Wolf, and he quoted von Neumann. He said, von Neumann said this, and I looked at the proof. Yes, it makes complete sense. And then I became interested in solving the paradox. So that's my story.
It's kind of hard to understand.
My story ended in a very good news, however, because in 1985, finally, while a very heated discussion with a friend, the solution dawned on me. I didn't know at the time that Madame Blavatsky unknowingly has given the same solution. Of course, also, I should have known, but I didn't. Upanishads discovered that truth 7,000 years ago, and that truth has been discovered again and again by spiritual traditions. But I was truly a materialist. I didn't know any of it.
So, Tucker's hypothesis on how reincarnation could exist. Quantum physics shows that at the most basic level of the universe, events involving its smallest particles, such as electrons and protons, only occur once they are observed. This suggests that the material world may be derived from consciousness, not the other way around. Although that idea is debated by many, it is a belief that's been shared by a number of quantum physicists, including Max Planck, the father of quantum mechanics. If consciousness creates the material world, then it may not be dependent upon that world to exist. It would follow that consciousness does not depend on a living brain to exist. If consciousness doesn't require a brain, it may continue after the brain stops working. It could then get attached to a new brain and continue on in another life. I don't know. I don't know if I have time to really get to this other stuff. Near-death experiences. Although near-death experiences vary from one person to another, they often include such features as the following: feeling very comfortable and free of pain, a sensation of leaving the body, sometimes being able to see the physical body while floating above it, the mind functioning more clearly and more rapidly than usual, a sensation of being drawn into a tunnel or darkness, a brilliant light, sometimes at the end of the tunnel, a sense of overwhelming peace, well-being, or absolute unconditional love, a sense of having access to unlimited knowledge, a life review or recall of important events in the past, a preview of future events yet to come, encounters with deceased loved ones or with other beings that may be identified as religious figures. While these features are commonly reported, many NDEs differ from this pattern and include other elements. For example, some near-death experiences may be frightening or distressing rather than peaceful. We are interested in hearing about all kinds of near-death and similar experiences and in studying their effect upon persons who have them. I thought it said vertical. Veritical NDEs. We are particularly interested in studying NDEs that may bear on the question of whether the mind can function outside the physical body, and on whether we may survive bodily death. One such type of experience is the so-called Veritical Nde, in which experiencers acquire verifiable information that they could not have obtained by any normal means. For example, some experiencers report seeing events going on at some distant location, such as another room of the hospital, or an experiencer might meet a deceased loved one who then communicates verifiable information that the experiencer had not known. Other kinds of NDEs that may bear on the mind-body question include those in which mental functioning seems to be enhanced despite physiological evidence that the brain is impaired. The causes of NDEs are complex and not fully known. While many medical and psychological explanations have been offered, they remain speculative and often fall short of explaining the entire phenomenon. Who's this again? Metaphysician Rudolf Steiner referenced the Akashic Records, asserting that every action, word, and thought leaves a trace in etheric realms. Contemporary physicist Ervin Laszlo explores concepts of Akasha from the perspective of science, concluding that the Akasha contains templates for human ideals such as harmony and equanimity. This is reflected in his Akasha paradigm, which he relates to human evolutionary processes. Those who subscribe to Akashic record models often reference the Book of Life, first mentioned in the Old Testament, Exodus. Biblical scripture asserts that a record of every life is kept in heaven, and it is from these records that souls are judged. Explorations of the Akashic field were also a major focus of the writings and work of Edgar Cayce. Cayce's Akashic studies posited that there is a storehouse of information in a non-physical plane of existence, which maintains a record of every soul's past, present, and future. Cayce's readings are some of the best known. Okay, finally, maybe genetic memory. Okay, I'll stop soon, I'm sorry. Genetic memory is a psychological phenomenon which is officially defined as a memory present at birth that exists in the absence of sensory experience and is incorporated into the genome over long spans of time. Of the many variations of human memory, genetic recollections are not discussed as often, yet maintain aspects on the lives of virtually every human being in one capacity or another. This type of memory is rooted in the notion that repeated experiences shared by humans of a similar genetic makeup will hence be inherited or otherwise incorporated into one's genes. The phenomenon of genetic memory is inherently nuanced and complex. Psychology today goes into further detail about this manner of remembrances. For starters, while there is an assortment of memory types, the likelihood of an individual suddenly recalling specific events from the lives of their ancestors is extremely improbable, if not downright impossible. Of the recollections which have the highest plausibility of being genetically incorporated, semantic memories make the top of the list. Seeing as semantic memory is overall information which is garnered over the course of one's lifetime. Some great minds have theorized about the human capacity to simply inherit certain innate qualities, such as learning capacity, brain power, and of course, memories. Furthermore, it is worth noting that certain specifics revolving around genetic memory remain under investigation by specialists and scientists. Many features and causes of genetic memory are unknown at this point in time. There are a variety of prevalent theories. The majority of relevant hypotheses share ties with philosophy and even spirituality. For instance, a psychologist named Carl Jung once said that religious beliefs and even racial discrimination are genetically inherited, according to Rational Wiki. However, the foregoing opinions are not rooted in science and remain highly contestable in today's world. Countless individuals and studies have expressed statements affirming that religion, discrimination, or lack thereof are learned behaviors, as opposed to inherited traits and philosophies. Another theory surrounding genetic memory states that recollections from one's predecessors are eventually kept in their DNA and later passed down to descendants. This, however, is only the beginning of the theory. The rest goes on to claim that people have the ability to access the alleged remembrances of their ancestors by thinking magically, or even using certain equipment which is designed to scan the human brain. However, this theory is largely disputed by science, seeing that genetic recollections only occur within organisms as opposed to gamete cells. Genetic memory and phobias. Despite the plethora of studies, or theories and speculations which surround the phenomenon of genetic memories, there are some beliefs which are supported by science and various case studies. This is explained by Telegraph, which affirms that while certain recollections can be genetically inherited, so can phobias. According to Emory University School of Medicine researchers, mice currently possess the capability to pass down information regarding stressful and traumatic occurrences to their descendants. The information is shared via chemical DNA alterations, thus leading to the merited notion that certain fears are hereditary. That is interesting. One of the strongest adversaries against the phenomenon of genetic memory is the impact of one's environment. As a matter of fact, this debate has proceeded for quite some time. Countless psychologists, sociologists, and other related specialists have studied and found intrigue in the actions and mindsets of various individuals and groups. Different scientists have a variety of theories on whether or not matters such as intelligence, learning aptitudes, talents, worldviews, etc. are genetically programmed or learned via exposure to certain environments. Can genetic memory be activated? I don't know. Okay, I'm going to fix all that. I don't really understand this shit. Cloud of the unconscious. This is materialism. Also called physicalism. In philosophy, the view that all facts, including facts about the human mind and will and the course of human history, are causally dependent upon physical processes, or even reducible to them. The word materialism has been used in modern times to refer to a family of metaphysical theories of the nature of reality that can best be defined by saying that a theory tends to be called materialist if it is felt sufficiently to resemble a paradigmatic theory that will here be called mechanical materialism. I don't know. I think I should stop. Pat Price. He was really psychic. He was good at remote viewing. Unbelievably accurate, a former CIA official said about Pat Price. What is this? Okay, anyway. I don't know if I believe in it. Out-of-body experience. That's kind of it. Astral projection. Oh, there's Blavatsky. Astral projection is the supposed act of leaving your body while sleeping. I don't think they necessarily have to be asleep. The idea comes from a 19th... Judy, you're about to fall. 19th century mystical system called Theosophy, which claims that we have 7 bodies from the lowest physical to the highest spiritual and mental bodies. Taming the Astral Body by John L. Crow. Ongoing problem of emotion and control. I have that problem. Okay, Judy, I'll let you down, but I hope she doesn't start wailing. Theosophy teaches that there are 7 bodies of man, the third of which is the astral body. According to Blackmore, the astral body can leave the physical and etheric bodies behind and go traveling on the astral planes. Theosophy had a profound effect on artists and scientists in the 19th and 20th century. As astral projection became a subject of popular fiction, we can see some of the origins of its use in films such as Doctor Strange. I don't know. I didn't really get into the water memory thing. I don't know what to do next week. What is this? Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. Oh, is this from Wordsworth? Wordsworth. There are a bunch of people who believe in this stuff. Broken 76 says, I've totally astral projected before. Really? Not long ago, you should tell me about it sometime. Not long ago, I saw a slogan on a bumper sticker, reincarnation is having a comeback. Who believes in reincarnation? A better question might be, who doesn't? The influx of traditional teachers and teachings from the East clearly accounts in part for our shifting attitudes towards reincarnation, but over the centuries, the West has had many distinguished believers of its own. Take the following delightful example. The body of B. Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here for the worms, but the work shall not be lost, for it will, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more elegant edition, revised and corrected. Benjamin Franklin wrote that when he was 21. And he wasn't the only famous Westerner to believe that the soul not only survives death, but returns in a new body to continue or rectify the life previously lived on Earth. Evidence of this belief can be found in the writings of poets, writers, philosophers across the centuries. Dante, Marcello Ficino, Paracelsus, Shakespeare, Goethe, probably saying that wrong, okay. Wordsworth, Swedenborg, Hume, Schopenhauer, George Sand, Walter Scott, Victor Hugo, Emerson, Wagner, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, W.B. Yeats, Aldous Huxley, Somerset Maugham, D.H. Lawrence, Rilke, Pearl S. Buck, Carl Jung, Winston Churchill, Norman Mailer, and Shirley MacLaine. Reincarnation has never officially been condoned by the Catholic Church or any of the major Protestant churches, but it was an almost universal belief among the many Gnostic and pagan sects that proliferated in the first 3 centuries of our era. Most educated Greeks and Romans of the Hellenic period subscribed to it, especially those initiated into the great mystery schools of Eleusis, Mithras, Dionysus, or Osiris. We find it in the teachings of the Pythagorean Brotherhood. I still want to do an episode on Pythagoras. An offshoot of the Orphic mysteries, and of course, in the doctrines Plato taught in his famous academy. The philosopher and initiate Plutarch, who became a priest at Delphi, wrote, "We know that the soul is indestructible and should think of its experience as like that of a bird in a cage. If it has been kept in a body for a long time and become tamed to this life as a result of all sorts of involvements and long habituation, it will alight back to a body again after birth and will never stop becoming entangled in the passions and chances of this world." Many surviving Gnostic writings whose origins are hotly debated by scholars show striking similarities to Buddhist and Hindu teachings about the soul's journey after death, no doubt because of many centuries of contact between Eastern and Western cultures following the conquest of Alexander the Great. It is known, for example, that Buddhists taught in Alexandria and that yogis reached Athens where they were dubbed gymnophysicists. Super trip. Dungeon Sim. Ben Franklin sure was a character. Yeah, I like him. He was very, very interesting. Okay, so I don't know. Secret teaching. Oh, she's about to start doing it again, I think. William Wordsworth wrote, "Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star." Come here, Judy. "Hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home." Here's Ian Stevenson again. What's Jim Tucker?
This program on our consciousness series.
Oh my God.
Dr. Tucker is the professor of psychiatry.
Together. And then he pointed to the one on the far right and said, "And Mama, that's me.
Sorry.
I found me." Now, the first person that he pointed to was George Raft, who was quite a well-known actor back in his day. But the second one he pointed to, the one that he said he had been, was an extra with no lines in the movie. So Ryan's mom wrote to me to see if I could help sort out who this fellow was. So I visited the family and met with Ryan and his parents. And then afterwards, his mom started emailing me sometimes on a daily basis with all the statements that Ryan was making about his past life. And he was describing quite a life that, frankly, I thought was a little unlikely for an extra with no lines in a movie.
If anyone wants to do some remote viewing experiments with me, let me know.
Eventually, with the help of a Hollywood archivist, we were able to determine who this fellow was. What the archivist did was she went to the library of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and she got all the materials about this movie night after night. And most of it had to do with the stars, but then she came across this picture, and on the back of it was a caption. It said, "What the well-dressed racketeer will wear." Marty Martin playing a racketeer
Broken
in
76
Paramount's
says,
Night
"I'm
After
down."
Night with George Raft and
Cool.
the other stars gives a demonstration.
Basically, we would just, like, if you join on Telegram, we can communicate with each other. But try to draw a picture of what the other person's looking at, you know, at a specific time. And in that book, Limitless Mind by Russell Targ, he even talks about some precog kind of stuff, like where people, I don't know, maybe I'll pull it up.
Demonstration of underworld sartorial excellence.
The future influencing the
make
past.
Sure that we had the right guy, and later confirmed with Marty Martin's family that in fact that was who Ryan had pointed to. And even though I thought it was unlikely that an extra would have the kind of life that Ryan described, it turned out that Marty Martin did. So Ryan said how he had danced on stage in New York. Well, Marty Martin danced on Broadway. And Ryan said that he then went to Hollywood and worked in the movies, which Marty Martin did, mostly working on dancing in the movies. Ryan said that he then worked at an agency, and Marty Martin started a successful talent agency. Ryan said he saw the world from big boats and talked about going to Paris. Marty Martin and his wife went on the Queen Mary to Europe and visited Paris.
Okay,
Ryan,
I just put the link to the Telegram channel in the...
He said that he had a big house with a swimming pool, which Marty Martin did. And Ryan said that this...
Man, I got a story for you. Telegram? I'll have to get it. Yeah, I just now put the link there in the, you know, below the video, I guess.
Street address had the word rock or mount in it, and Marty Martin lived on North Roxbury. Ryan also said one time that he didn't know why God would let you get to 61 and then make you come back again as a baby. Which is an interesting question. So Marty Martin died in 1964, and his death certificate said that he was only 59 when he died. So it looked like that was one that Ryan was wrong about. But then Marty Martin's daughter and his stepson both said that actually he was 61. So I looked into it and found a passenger list, 3 census records, and 2 marriage listings that all gave ages that meant, in fact, Marty Martin was 61 when he died and not 59. So even though the death certificate had said 59, Ryan was correct when he said 61. Now, I mentioned Marty Martin's daughter. She was only 8 when he died, but I met with...
Oh, I did that one. Thank you. Installing. Oh, yeah. By the way, I would recommend, you might not want to, but if you want the uncensored version of Telegram, you would want to download it directly from the Telegram website, if possible. Just I don't know. It's just, it doesn't really matter, I guess, but if you download it from the Google Play Store, there will be certain channels you cannot view, which I find annoying.
With her and went over all of Ryan's statements. There was a lot about her father's life that she didn't know because she was so young when he died, including didn't know about one of his sisters. But between talking with her and the records that we were able to get, we were able to eventually verify that over 50 of Ryan's statements match with Marty Martin's life.
It just popped in my head, but I might do an episode sometime on the Monsanto family.
And then we had a meeting where we had Ryan meet Marty Martin's daughter, who of course is now solidly middle-aged. And I had to say it was quite an awkward meeting. Ryan seemed rather overwhelmed by the whole thing. But then afterwards, he enjoyed going to the building where Marty Martin's talent agency had been. And then after that trip, he started wearing what he called his agent glasses. If you notice the pictures of Marty Martin when he was older, he had these thick black frames for his glasses. And Ryan got some glasses. I think these are 3D glasses from a movie theater. But what he called his many more years writing.
Ian Stevenson's Reincarnation in Biology. I find this very interesting, the idea of the birthmarks and the birth defects, and also like the facial features having similarities.
Them up, and eventually published a book called Reincarnation in Biology, which is a 2-volume, 2,000-page book of over 200 such cases. And I don't have time to review all 200 cases with you, but I'll show you a couple of pictures. So there was a girl who remembered the life of a man who got his fingers chopped off as he was being murdered. And the little girl was born with her hands looking like that.
That picture again.
There was a boy who remembered the life of a boy from another village who had lost the fingers of his right hand in a fodder chopping machine. And the second little boy was born with his hands looking like that, which is quite an unusual defect. There was also a boy who remembered the life of a man who was killed by a shotgun blast to the side of his head. And this little boy was born with just a stub for an ear and an underdeveloped right side of his face.
Weird.
Ian also listed 18 cases in which children were born with 2 birthmarks, ones that matched both the entrance wound and the exit wound on the body of a gunshot victim. Now, as if these cases aren't strange enough, there's also a phenomenon in several parts of Asia that Ian called experimental birthmarks. And this is a practice where after a person dies, someone will take a substance, usually soot or paste, and make a mark on the body and make a wish that the person carried the mark with them to their next life, where they'll be born with a birthmark that shows where they have come to be reborn. And this is usually done with the expectation that the person will be born into the same family. So Ian studied 20 of these cases, and then a colleague and I found 18 more. One of the ones that we found was a boy in Thailand who was thought to be his grandmother. And his grandmother, before she died, said that she wanted to come back as a male so that one day she could have a mistress the way her husband did. And after she died, one of her daughters took some white paste and just made a mark down the back of her neck. And then a year later, a grandson was born, and he had this mark on the back of his neck.
That is a common place for birthmarks, I've noticed. Like a lot of people have, it's usually kind of reddish, like right there on the nape of the neck.
He didn't talk a lot about her life, but he did make a number of statements remembering being his grandmother. This is another case from Thailand. This is a little girl whose grandfather died 5 years before she was born. And a couple of hours after he died, her aunt took some soot from the bottom of a rice pot. And I had one of the villagers put some on his finger just to show what it looked like. She took some soot from the bottom of a rice pot and made a mark on his right leg above his ankle. And then 5 years later, this little girl was born with this mark on her right leg above her ankle. Now, when we saw her, she was only 2.5, and she hadn't made any clear statements that related to the past life, but of course, she was still very young then. And then the last case of this type that I want to tell you about is one of Ian's cases from Burma. This young woman, unfortunately, was the previous person in this case. She was born with a congenital heart defect and then died when she was 20 during open heart surgery. And after she died, 3 of her friends offered to prepare the body for cremation. And they'd heard about bodies being marked, so they took some red lipstick and made markings on the back of her neck. And then a year later, her older sister was born. And her older sister gave birth to a girl who was born with this birthmark. If you can see, it's a red area on the back of her neck.
It's a common
as
spot.
Ian pointed out, the women picked the worst possible place to mark a body because stork bite birthmarks are pretty common and will occasionally persist into early childhood. But when Ian studied this case, he also noticed that this little girl, and I don't know how well it projects, but she had this white line going from mid-sternum to mid-abdomen that looked similar to a cardiac surgery scar, except it was older, at least by the time that he met the girl when she was 4 years old.
And she had talked about the past life. In fact, she had asked to be called by the previous person's name. And she would refer to the family members by the relationship that the previous woman had. So, for instance, she called her own mother the term for older sister. And when Ian studied the case, he interviewed the women who had marked the body and discovered that one of them had never met this little girl. So unannounced, he took the woman to the family's home. They walked in and he said to the little girl, "Who is this?" And she immediately said, "Mint Mint Ooh," which in fact was the name of the woman who had marked the body.
Okay.
And he said, Jack Larson. So this was all when he was 2. And then when he was 2 and a half, his father bought this book on Iwo Jima to give to his father, James's grandfather. And he was looking through it one day when James came and got in his lap. And they got to this page that showed a picture of Iwo Jima. And James pointed at the picture and said, "That's where my plane was shot down." And his dad said, "What?" And he said, "My airplane got shot down there, Daddy." And that just floored James's dad that his 2.5-year-old was talking like this. And then he learned that the Natoma Bay did, in fact, take part in the Iwo Jima operation. Then when James got old enough to draw, he drew dozens and dozens of pictures of planes, and he always signed them James 3. Now, I thought that might be because he was 3 years old when he drew them, but his parents said no. They asked him about it, and he said, "I'm the third James. I'm James 3. And in fact, he continued to sign them that way even after he turned 4. And his dad pointed out, and I kind of agreed, that all those dots that he drew on there look like incoming flak that a pilot would see flying the plane. God. So with all this going on, James's parents did eventually begin to wonder if he was in fact remembering past life. So when he was 4 and a half, James's dad went to a Natoma Bay reunion.
Old.
And he learned that in fact there was a Jack Larson who had been on the ship. He was looking for Jack Larsons among the war dead, but this Jack Larson had survived the war and was even still alive. So James's dad went and met with him and learned that he was on the ship during the Iwo Jima operation. And he also learned that there was one and only one pilot from the ship that was killed during the Iwo Jima operation. This was a young man from Pennsylvania named James Houston. So that means if James Leininger was remembering a past life, it had to be Houston's life because he was the only pilot from the ship who was killed there. So what we can do is compare James's statements with Houston's life. Now,
all right, I should
James's
stop. It's like 2 hours.
He also talked about family life before the war. But we don't have documentation of those statements that was made before Houston was identified.
I'm just going to X out the physical similarities thing. What do they call it? Decoding the neuroscience. I don't know. I have trouble stopping. I'm like, I can't feel like it's like resolved. I don't know if I believe in it, but it's just interesting, I guess. Panpsychism is the view that all things have a mind or a mind-like quality. The word itself was coined by Italian. Oh, I think I already read this. Okay, whatever. I'm sorry. I'll stop. Hold on. Reincarnation, physical. I just thought it was interesting, the idea that physical signs and reincarnation. Physical resemblance in reincarnation cases. Yeah, just sort of the people kind of do look like each other. Even when they're not necessarily like you know, in the same family or even the same race. I thought there would be more images available showing it. Oh, here we go. What is this supposed to be? Elon Musk? It's teeny. He's supposed to be Thomas Edison, I guess. Okay. What the hell? What else have we got? Oh yeah, here's one where it's like a different race. Judy, you can't go. You're just gonna go and start meowing. I don't know if I really see the similarities on that one, but Judy, stay here. Paul McCartney. Antonio Vivaldi. He's supposed to be Vivaldi, I guess. Isn't it Keanu Reeves who looks just like a bunch of like old people? What is this, Fauci? Judy, what are you doing? Stop. Thomas Tuttle. I can definitely see the similarities here. What else have we got? Burt Reynolds and Douglas Fairbanks. Nat King Cole and John Legend. I don't really see it there. This might just be random people putting pictures up. Okay, what does this say? The evidence for reincarnation? Judy. Jesus. Just be so quiet. Have you lived before? The concept of reincarnation is that our souls may experience many lifetimes over centuries. Ruth Simmons. Yeah, supposedly there have been cases where people can like speak other languages that they didn't know from past lives, and yeah. I don't know. Anyway, I guess I should call it good. I'll have to choose something a little more exciting. I don't know. I'm just really into this whole thing. I might start meditating or something. Anyway, so someone destroyed the the Georgia Guidestones. That's the most interesting thing that's happened lately. And then a former Japanese prime minister got murdered with what looks like some sort of homemade gun. The collective unconscious is a universal datum, meaning that every human being is endowed with the psychic archetypal layer since his or her birth. One cannot acquire this strata by education or other conscious efforts because it is innate. I like Jung. I like Carl Jung. It's cool. Okay, let's just X out. Let's call it good. Let's end it. I'm sorry. Went on a little too long there. Thank you. And be well. And thank you and goodbye. And until next time. Thank you. Have a good night.